In this presentation, I'd like to talk some about two philosophers, two ancient Greek philosophers, that I think highlight another very important philosophical issue that will continue to remain with us really in many ways up until our own time, in many ways. And that is the philosophically different positions between Heraclitus, who lived in the 6th century BC, and Parmenides, who lived in the 5th century BC. Heraclitus is famous for a series of fragments of his writings that have survived in people like Aristotle. And one of the statements in particular, perhaps the one that he's most famous for, is the statement, "You can never step in the same river twice. It is ever flowing and ever anew." You can never step in the same river twice. If you think about it, when you see a river, and occasionally there are places in my own life experience that I like to go and revisit. When I was growing up, there was a little park close to my home where this bayou ran through the park. And I would go there as a boy, and my parents would take me over there, and then as I grew up in a neighborhood nearby. I would sometimes maybe take a jog over to the park, or I'd take a walk to the park. Maybe if some challenging thing was going on in my life, I'd go and sit at the park. I'd walk across the bridge there. I'd go for a jog. There was a little track back behind it. There was some exercise things, some bars that you could do pull-ups on and so on. And so frequently, as I grew up, and even after I was grown, I would occasionally stop by that park, which had some sentimental significance to me because of the many experiences that I had at that park through the years. The park has changed significantly, though, over that time. The bridges have been rebuilt, the places where children play have all the swing sets and all that equipment has been changed. The swimming pool, I think, has been filled in and no longer functions there. Many things have changed about the park through the years, but I still go there and it brings back those memories. Heraclitus challenges me to think, and challenges us to think, about those things that seem most stable in our lives. You go to a river, you go to the ocean, you go to some place that seems stable and seems unchanging. You go to that place and you find that when you think a little bit seriously about it, it doesn't look as if there's anything that's stable about it at all. The water of the bayou runs through, or the river runs through. The water, every time I go, is different water than the last time I was there. The trees have changed, the grass has grown, the clouds have moved along, and so the light that's coming from the sun is different light. Everything about it seems to be different. Although it gives the appearance of stability, it looks like it's the same thing. In fact, it has dramatically changed over the course of the brief span of time since the last time that I was present there. So Heraclitus presents to us a theory of reality that it is fundamentally in flux, it is fundamentally in change. That the thing that is most stable about reality is in fact its instability, that it's constantly undergoing change and transformation. This is a metaphysical theory, of course. It's a theory of reality. Reality is at its core change. On the other hand, we have Parmenides. Parmenides presents really the opposite theory. For Parmenides, you look at the world and it appears as if it's changing, but in fact, when you think rationally about it, you discover that it doesn't change. Now, Parmenides' way of explaining this is a bit obscure, and it's a little difficult to understand. I'll throw it out to you real quick. Probably not going to make a whole lot of sense. Maybe it will. But if you don't understand what I'm about to say, don't worry. I'll tell you a little bit about how a student of his, a fellow by the name of Zeno, very famous philosopher, how he was able to make clearer the point that Parmenides was making. Parmenides explained it like this. He wanted us to be clear in the way we talk about things. Parmenides was concerned about negations in human speech. We use words like not or no, there is not, or there is no. When we say, for example, if we take two things, if I take the piece of paper that's in front of me and the pen that's in front of me, for instance, and I say, what's the difference between these two things? You would probably say, well, one's a pen and one's a piece of paper. Or you might say, to put it more bluntly, you might say one is a pen and one is not a pen. Now, in that statement, one is not a pen. Parmenides asked, how does the word not function there? The word not is a negation of something, but the negation doesn't tell you anything positive about the thing itself. When I say it's not something, when I say a piece of paper is not a pen, I don't know what the paper is. So the word not is really not communicating anything substantial or anything truly meaningful about the piece of paper, because all it's done is eliminated one thing that the paper is from presumably an infinity of things that it could be. So what Parmenides suggests is that we take the word not or no, we take negation terms out of our speech altogether and see what happens. If you take the word not or no out of your speech, what you find is that you can't differentiate between two things. If you can't say that the pen is not a piece of paper, you can't use the word not at all, what you find is that all of reality simply becomes one. There is no difference between any two things because you can't differentiate them. You have to use some kind of negation to say that something is not another. Reality then all blends together. Everything becomes one and indistinguishable. Now, as I said a few moments ago, you might find that confusing or not very convincing. So let me take his student Zeno and try to show you how he argues in defense of his great teacher Parmenides. The way he does it is this. He creates a series of paradoxes, and there were dozens of them that have survived through the centuries, but let me just present the simplest of them. He uses various paradoxes, and the goal of the paradox is to prove this. Reality does not change. There is no difference between any two things. That change and difference are illusory. That what we are experiencing right now in the world is a grand illusion. Now you might wonder, why would we even spend time talking about these people? And I think there is good reason to talk about them. And you'll see as we journey on that there is tremendous significance to thinking about this particular question. Lots of philosophical implications of this conversation. So when we look at Zeno and his various paradoxes, what he's trying to do is this. He wants to begin with the assumption that there is such a thing as motion, and let's see what happens. That there is such a thing as change. Let's assume that there is change in the world around us, and let's see where that takes us. So he gives us an example. Let's say that I want to get up and walk out the door. I want to get up and walk out the door. In order for me to walk out the door, Zeno would say, I first have to get halfway to the door. But in order to get halfway to the door, I've got to get halfway to the halfway point between me and the door. And then I have to get halfway point to that, and then I have to get to a halfway point to that. How many times can I divide the line between me and the door? And of course the answer is I can divide the line between me and the door to infinity. Zeno draws the conclusion, in order for me to get to the door in finite time, I have to cross over an infinite number of points that separate me from the door. And Zeno says that's impossible. It's illogical. It's illogical to think that I could move over an infinity of points in a finite amount of time. If we think about that in terms of things or objects, and not points, but think in terms of things or objects, it becomes very obvious that the statement seems to be true. For example, if between me and the door there were an infinity of desks, I obviously would never get to the door because I could never get across or over an endless series of desks. Now, the problem, of course, is that we can get up and walk to the door. So that seems to suggest that there's something wrong in Zeno's thought. Zeno is undeterred, of course. His conclusion is that because it seems like I can get out the door, it must mean that my sense experience is contrary to my rationality. My rationality tells me that I can't get to the door because I'd have to cross over infinity. You can't cross over infinity in finite time. Therefore, I can't get out the door. But I seem to be getting out the door, so that suggests that my sense experience, my sensory data that's coming to me, is an illusion. That what we really have here is a dreamlike state, because space and time don't seem to conform to the dictates of rationality or logic. Now, obviously, most people do not accept his conclusion. Some have accepted his conclusion, usually for other reasons. But the paradox itself is intriguing, and I find that most people find the paradox an interesting conundrum to reflect on. It seems to me, to make a long conversation short, it seems to me that the problem that Zeno is engaged in here is a confusion of two realms. One is the abstract mathematical world of the mind, and the other is the concrete world of time and space. In the world of mathematics, or in the world of geometry in the mind, points are really not material entities at all. A point is a mental entity. A point is a location on a plane. A location that has no extension, no width, no weight, no mass, no color. It has none of those physical qualities or characteristics. And so when I try to say that there's an infinity of points between me and the door, there is an infinity of points between me and the door in the sense of rational distinctions that I can make, but there are not an infinity of actual things, physical things extended in space between me and the door. If there were an infinity of physical things between me and the door, I could never reach the door. So mentally or rationally, I can talk about an infinity of finite things between 2 points, but really and metaphysically, in the sense of there being a real physical thing to infinity between 2 finite points, the response is that there can't be such a thing. And because there's not really an infinity of real things between me and the door, then I can walk out the door. As I said a moment ago, there are truly significant philosophical implications of these problems. Surely Heraclitus is onto something when he talks about reality as being in a constant state of flux. And surely Parmenides and Zeno are seeing something when they talk about the stability of reality, or that there are, when you talk about infinity, then you're talking about something that cannot undergo motion. It might just be, in the final analysis, that both of these thinkers, both Heraclitus and Parmenides, are seeing something valid and true about reality, but they are looking at 2 distinct aspects of reality. Perhaps one of them is looking at the sensory world that is really at its core constantly undergoing change. And perhaps the other one is looking at the world of the mind, in which we are invited to consider realities that in very many respects differ from the kind of reality that we're looking at in the sensory world. Whatever the case may be, this distinction or this tornness between Heraclitus and Parmenides on the nature of reality gives way to a period of time in ancient Greek philosophy where there was a great deal of skepticism and relativism that emerged among those that we call the sophists. The sophists were characterized, at least according to Plato and Socrates, by, in many ways, a disregard for the pursuit of ultimate questions and ultimate answers to questions. And this is going to give rise to the most important period of ancient Greek philosophy, and that is the period where we find the emergence of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, by far the 3 most important philosophers, I think, that have lived in the history of the Western world, and perhaps even the world altogether, because they raise the great questions that will continue to preoccupy us and be pushed before our attention in the history of reflection and thought. Just to anticipate Plato and his contributions, Plato certainly thinks that looking at reality and seeing both change and stability, or permanence and unchangingness, are 2 valid experiences. But we're looking at 2 different realms. We're looking at 2 different aspects of reality. And therefore any view of reality that only holds to one or the other is an incomplete or reductionistic theory of reality. We have to take all of our experience into account if we're going to have a valid and workable and complete and satisfactory theory of what reality is, or philosophical approach to what reality is. Also, by way of anticipation, we're going to see as we continue our journey that Christian theology is very much going to be influenced by, or is going to embrace, this kind of dualism, a dualism between the material world and the spiritual world, or the world of the mind, and the corresponding objects to these distinct experiences of the world. And we'll talk soon about each of those.